Hi, everyone. Welcome to our town hall, the COVID-19 town hall. I'm just waiting for 1 minute for everyone's video and to be on. Great. Welcome, Zelly.
Hey, I'm back.
You are back. Waiting on Carol and Imani.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Imani. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Zelly and Imani, I don't know if you know each other, but
Yes, we do.
For a number of years now, actually.
Yes.
Well, a number of things clued me in on that. But I'm really honored to have you, both of you, and Carol on. We're gonna wait for her for a second. I don't know if her. Oh, there you are. Great. I didn't see you for a second on my screen. Well, you're all here, so we are gonna go ahead and get started. We're just waiting on people to jump on. I think they are doing that. Which is great. All right, well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, those of you who are jumping on all of our different live streams. And really special thanks to Zelly, Imani, as well as Carol for being here. I really appreciate this. I think this is an important conversation and actually a series of conversations that we should be having in general, particularly with the pandemic that we have now. So it's my honor and it's my pleasure to welcome you. I'm going to very quickly introduce you, and then we have a bunch of questions already. So we're going to sort of get started right in after I give you a chance to talk a little bit. So we have with us Imani Oakley, who is the dean, the first dean of the Movement School. And she'll be talking about that before, but of course, all three of our panelists today are community organizers, have been advocates, and really longtime supporters, and frankly, to me personally, inspirational in what they do. So I'm really excited to have you here, Imani. We have Carol Ruiz as well, who is the co-president of Wind of the Spirit, which is an immigrant resource center, and she'll be talking about that as well. And we have Zelly Imani, who I've gotten to know a little bit over the past couple of weeks, who is, of course, an educator as well as a community organizer. And if I were to share each of their bios, we would be here for the entire hour. So I'm going to keep it short, but know that it's not because because of a lack of admiration here or a lack of receipts that you all have, clearly. So I would love to get started. Look, we know that COVID-19 as a pandemic has completely shocked the system, right? It's shocked us all in all these different ways. We also know that, frankly, Black and Brown communities are disproportionately been affected. And we're only now starting to dig into why or how or what those effects are. Part of what these town halls are about are really highlighting some of these gaps that we have, highlighting some of these stories, and then moving toward solutions, moving towards the kinds of things that we should be fighting for, and the kinds of things we should be demanding, all of us, because this is not just one community problem. This is about all of us as a society. So I'd love to get you all started. If you have a couple of, if you have a minute or so to talk really about the pandemic and how it's affected you and your community, if you wanted to highlight one or two ways in this, I'd love to get you started. Carol, do you want to start?
Thank you, Dr. Arti. Yes, I'd love to start and share with you all the resource document that Wind of the Spirit created collectively. We do everything collectively. It's about 22 pages. It's very, very thorough. But we created this document. I'm sharing it now with all panelists and attendees because we were feeling the panic. I'm in Dover, New Jersey, and it is the community hardest hit in Morris County with COVID-19. It is a segregated community of majority immigrants from Latin America, as well as a small community that is here, immigrants from the Philippines, a small African-American community, a small Afro-Caribbean community, and it is a working class community. So one of the main points that I want to make is that we have to advocate for ourselves now more than ever. We know what the, for example, infant mortality rates are for African-American families. We know that Hispanic, Latinx, and Black communities suffer from asthma and diabetes and all these other factors that make us vulnerable to COVID-19 at higher rates than white and affluent communities. So we knew that we had to advocate for ourselves, and sadly that was proven. Several members of our community are telling us they're calling 911 and no ambulance is showing up. No, you have COVID-19, it's fine, have some hot tea, take your Zithromax. It's not an emergency. Well, it is. And we shouldn't have to, but we need to express what our needs are. Can the person speak a full sentence? Are they running out of breath? What is their fever and how long have they had a fever? We at Wind of the Spirit are providing thermometers so that people can relay these symptoms to whoever answers that 911 call. What pre-existing conditions does a person have? What medications are they already on? What are the symptoms of a stroke, of a heart attack, so that we can really use our ancestral knowledge, right? What our grandmothers taught us and on how to care for ourselves to ensure that the ambulance does pick us up, and that when we are at the hospitals, that our needs are taken care of. We are hearing about rationing, right? There's not enough ventilators, so who's going to get the ventilator? Is it going to be the white, affluent young man with a promising future, or the young, poor Black man with an equally promising future, or the elder Latina woman with an equally promising future, but those promising futures are not valued the same way. So this document talks about that, how to ensure that you're monitoring your symptoms, that you're expressing yourself as best you can. Obviously, language is also a barrier for many immigrant communities, and counting on each other. I've made myself available. If the EMT, if the hospital, if whoever it is not providing you with an interpreter, one, you have a legal right to that. But if they're not, call me. I'll be your interpreter. And how can we do a mutual aid so we can be there for one another and flatten the curve and lessen the number of deaths that our community suffers?
Mm-hmm. I think you've raised important issues, right? Particularly about access to care and when you're sick, whether communities are valued in the same way. I think that's always been the case. And it sounds as if, and it's the lived experiences, it's even worse now with COVID-19, with folks with EMTs potentially afraid of coming into certain communities or afraid of coming into certain places. And then you started talking about mutual aid, which of course I'm going to bounce now to Zelly because of a lot of things, right? And I'd love to hear from you. I mean, look, mutual aid and participating in this amazing thing that you've started and that has exploded in an amazing way, right? Over the past couple of weeks has been, to me, deeply meaningful personally. But it's also makes me angry, right? Because I always feel as if the need is so great and we have folks in our community coming together for this. Where's the help we really need? Where's the government? Where are the folks that are supposed to help us? And those are the twin feelings that I have when I think about this. And I would love to hear what mutual aid means to you. And I'd love to hear how you feel about this moving forward. And I will tell you, it's 75%, for me, it's 75% amazing and meaningful and 25% in some ways, and anger inducing and frustration when I realize how much there is still to be done. But I'd love to hear from you, Zelly, in terms of how you approach this and how you think about it.
No, definitely. So I think how I definitely approach mutual aid is really looking at the needs of the community, especially in these moments of crisis. We know that we already touched upon like the gaps that exist between white community members around the country versus our people of color, and these gaps have existed for generations and generations and generations. And instead of these gaps closing, they have increasingly started to widen. And COVID-19 just exacerbated this issue. So we've always had our people falling through these cracks. And what happened with COVID-19, it started as a crack maybe, and it right into like a canyon. So what the mutual aid is trying to do is to provide some type of safety net in order to catch as many people as possible. Because as we noticed, that our government is not responding in the way that it should be in order to protect its residents, protect its citizens. So what are we going to do in these moments of crisis? Are we going to allow our fellow, neighbors, our brothers, our sisters, and our uncles and grandmothers to perish because of this virus? Or are we going to act in a real meaningful way, in a real powerful way, and being there for our neighbor? One of the things I've often said, through this whole ordeal is that community is a verb. And that so often we believe that community is a noun, and that community means like how we live in proximity to one another. When actuality is about how we interacting with one another, especially in these moments of crisis. And that it's going to be us as neighbors, us as brothers and sisters, us as human beings that's going to turn to one another instead of turning against each other, that's going to really solve a lot of these problems that we have. And my hope is that these mutual aid networks and the bonds that we are forming are not going to disappear after, COVID-19 is eradicated or we find a vaccine. But these bonds that we are creating are going to be strengthened so that we can create the world that we desperately want to live in.
Mm-hmm. I hear that.
Dr. Arti, can I just add a quick piece on the mutual aid?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and thank you, Zelly, for that. I've been watching all the amazing work that you've been doing, not just now with COVID-19, but always to strengthen our communities and ensure that we're there for one another. At Wind of the Spirit, we have really highlighted that for ourselves and for the public, that we're not here helping each other or saving each other. None of us are saviors. I need you and you need me. So for example, Wind of the Spirit domestic workers, who are often the most ignored, they're the home health aides, the nannies, the babysitters, the cleaning ladies that we don't think about. Well, it's those women who are seamstresses and have made 5,000 masks, face covers that are reusable, that are washable, and that we are distributing to others in the community. You may have seen our violin protest in response to State Assemblyman Robert Auth, who was playing the violin, mocking our communities for being in dire need during COVID-19. Well, we brought him some masks and we brought him a message. So these masks, they're there for everybody. When we talk about sharing food, which is the basic need we have right now, yes, we are sharing food, but it is our day laborers, our landscapers that know how to grow the food. It is the immigrant farm workers, right? It is the poor Black kids and the poor white kids and the poor Asian kids that are working at these grocery food stores. And I say kids, I apologize, youth. I'm 41 years old, so I apologize. I slip into that language sometimes, but it is our youth, right? That are the heroes at the supermarkets, but we're not paying them hazard pay, and we're not ensuring that their families have what they need, that they have emergency funds. Well, again, we, the nonprofit community in New Jersey has created, I think, at least 20 different emergency funds. And you can see that on the resource document, so that the National Domestic Workers Alliance, through Wind of the Spirit and other organizations, will provide $400 through a Visa card to domestic workers who are now not able to work in homes, or not able to do their work as nannies, right? The kids are home, trying to have school from home. I know Make the Road New Jersey, New Labor, American Friends Service Committee, us at Wind of the Spirit, so many of us, CATA, which is a Central American farm workers group in South Jersey, a lot of us are really tapping in every way to ensure that we are helping, or not helping, that we are working together to ensure we can all survive this together. So, mutual aid is truly collective. It is truly mutual.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, actually, that you're talking about this in terms of this whole idea of that we're not saving anybody, right? We're here because this is part of all of us. And this is absolutely centering and making sure that we are helping each other in here. Imani, I'd love to have you talk about community organizing. I'd love to have you talk about, some of the different ways that you've seen COVID-19 intersect with the kinds of things that you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for having me. This is like the perfect example of what government representatives should be doing, talking with people and giving them programs like this. So thank you so much for this, number one. And, in my line of work, which is election work, politics and government, there are three main areas that are really concerning me right now. The first is, it's no secret, it's election time. We have a big presidential election coming down. We have a bunch of down ballot elections happening. And my huge concern is that people of color are not having their voices heard via their vote. We saw what's happened in Wisconsin, where we had the directive of like, no, don't go outside, we're not going to vote. But then it was like, oh, kidding, go outside and vote. We're going to give you 5 polling stations and, give you mixed messages and confuse the vote in that. We saw what happened recently in New York, where they tried to remove the presidential all the way from the ballot and not even have people come out and vote at all, giving the excuse of, oh, well, COVID, except they kept every other election still on the ballot. So people would still be actually voting. And, just the lack of, VBMs, extra polling stations, even some type of way to maybe help folks vote online. I know there's huge security issues, but, we do the census online, right? And so what are clever ways that we can get people of color to have their voices heard through their votes during this pandemic? So that's one thing that's concerning me. The other thing that's concerning me is the census, right? And, there were a lot of organizations in New Jersey that were pushing to help get out the census, help people get out and fill out the census and making that push. And the census is really important because it does two things. One, it gives you political representation. So it's used to draw up district lines. And two, it also helps to measure how much public funding a certain area can receive. Now, how does that relate to COVID? Well, after the devastation that COVID has caused, certain areas, especially areas of people of color, are going to desperately need public funds to rebuild. Desperately need public funds to rebuild, not only to, get jobs, but to do educational programs because kids are out of school, to get folks healthcare, better healthcare plans, excuse me. And all of these things are going to be increasingly important. And the census covers that. The amount of numbers that an area has of people of color and people of a certain socioeconomic class, we need the census to know that so that we can give them the adequate public funding that we need. So I'm really concerned about the average numbers. There's a organization, a think tank rather, called Urban Institute that is estimated that there will be about 4 million undercounted people for the census. 4 million people. And that's just by their estimates, right? That doesn't even count the people that maybe they haven't, gotten to yet, right? So that's the number two thing that concerns me with regards to, election work and COVID and folks of color. And then the last thing is just the sheer unwillingness of government officials and political representatives to just do the right thing. I mean, there was almost like a knee-jerk reaction to save corporations as soon as this happened. It was like, oh, people aren't taking airplanes, let's save the airplane companies. And it's just like, that seems so irrelevant when you have so many people who frankly are dying because they can't afford healthcare, or dying because we haven't figured out our racism problem in the hospitals, people who are at threat of losing their housing because they can't afford the rent, because they were working a gig job because we never got out of a gig economy. And now those gigs are no longer available, so people can't work, people can't get paid. And instead, we're like, oh, well, corporations clearly need this. These billion-dollar-a-year companies are the ones who need this help. And not everyday people. And that is so concerning to me. Just the sheer unwillingness and disregard for everyday people is shocking. I'll just be honest. Like it's shocking. And so those are, especially because of how many people of color are being affected by this in all of those categories, whether it's healthcare, jobs, housing, the disregard of those same politicians who will come around and pander when it's election time, say, vote for me, are not doing what they promised to do, which is represent those people adequately. So those are the three main areas that really concern me in my line of work with the COVID-19 crisis and folks of color.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say with the coronavirus stimulus packages that we're seeing, each new iteration seems to, at least for me, give at least 100 times more to corporations than it does to people. So every time the people get something, it's as if the corporations and the bailouts for billionaires get even given larger, right? So I was just looking at the news report today that Jeff Bezos will be the first American trillionaire in the middle of a pandemic. I think that is emblematic of the inequality that we have that just keep getting worse and worse and worse at the end of the day.
And if I could add something to that, what's also interesting about that is that Amazon just went through a strike because they weren't treating their workers well.
Exactly.
You got this trillionaire who's not treating essential workers in his company well, not paying them properly, not giving them proper safety precautions. And yet you have this trillionaire just being perfectly protected. And it's ridiculous. So sorry, I just
Yeah, and then we're also hearing about corporations who talk about how they're using this money for essential workers, whether they are doing it or not. And then several reports of folks taking the extra money back or refusing to do anymore, or not actually doing the kinds of things that you want them to do. So I agree completely. At the end of the day, we already know, at least, for me, from my perspective, healthcare should never be tied to employment. That's already a fundamental difference that we have. So then, we haven't expanded healthcare coverage enough. We haven't done enough with direct casualties. And then, we can talk about immigrants, undocumented folks, and where they are in these policies. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Carol.
We are punished and terrorized as we have been. And I just want to make it clear, this is not about Trump. This has been the case for this country's history. And it particularly became even more punitive during Bill Clinton's presidency. Now he's a Democrat. The 1996 laws that were passed were the laws that bar us from accessing state and federal benefits. So undocumented immigrants who do not have access to health insurance do have access to health care through federally qualified health care centers. So in, I believe, West Orange, Dover, Morristown, several places you have Zufall Health Center. That's in my community, but these centers are available elsewhere. But in the places where they're not available, there is no access to health care for someone who is uninsured and who is undocumented. With the stimulus package, that federal $1,200 that in New Jersey, doesn't pay the rent for most of us, but I guess it's better than nothing, right? Well, even that was tied to punitive, nativist, anti-immigrant legislation, so that if any U.S. citizen has a member of their household that is an undocumented immigrant, a spouse that is undocumented and files with an ITIN, then that person is punished. That U.S. citizen does not get the $1,200. The undocumented immigrant, of course, is not eligible for them. So it is disgusting that we are willing to allow our hate to push children, U.S. citizen children, into starvation because we refuse to give any benefit to someone based on an immigrant status. And again, that is why we are pushing on our state legislators and our federal legislators to remove that hate, that punitive, unnecessary clause, because many of us pay taxes. We pay in New Jersey millions and billions of taxes, and by we, I mean undocumented immigrants. We pay with ITIN numbers. So we're good enough to go and work for you. We're good enough to clean your house, to take care of your kids, to watch your grandma who has Alzheimer's and has dementia while you can go work. And we are good enough to pay taxes so you can get a $1,200 stimulus check. But when it comes time for us to have the care that we need and we deserve and we have rightfully paid into, we're excluded. So, talking about calls to action, please follow the hashtag I am essential or hashtag essential but excluded. That has to change, and that changes with us on the local level. When Imani's talking about elections, that's done purposely. We know that, right? They purposely don't want us voting. So it's important for us, as disgusting as it can be sometimes, and I use strong language, I won't apologize for it, but sometimes the choices that we have in legislators or elected officials is disgusting. But you've got to get out there. And maybe we start with the lesser of two evils and keep pushing till we get a candidate that is worth voting for. One that is not going to punish us for the color of our skin or because of our immigrant status or our sexual orientation or our religion or our gender.
Dovetailing with what you're talking about, actually, there's a question from someone out there who's asking, under the Department of Education guidelines, those with temporary immigration statuses would not qualify for a grant from their public university for unexpected COVID-related expenses. What can we do to include immigrant students in relief programs from public universities?
So just from a standpoint of pushing government to do things, call your legislator, right?
Mm-hmm.
Call your representatives, threaten to get them out of office if they do not do their job and protect everybody in their district, no matter what their immigrant status is. Call your government officials, call your offices, even if you personally are not of a certain immigration status or you don't live with somebody. I mean, your voice as a citizen, they will take that very, very, very seriously. Really stand up for others in your community. Call them and let them know, hey, listen, I'm a voter, I'm a citizen, or hey, I'm a voter and I'm an immigrant, and don't necessarily have to say your document status, but I'm an immigrant or I support immigrants, and I will absolutely vote you out of office. I will not forget what you do during this time. I will not forget what you're advocating for. I will not forget any of this, and you need to get your act together and start passing these things. I mean, really, really don't be afraid to hold your representatives' feet to the fire, because that's what they're there for. They're there to represent you and ultimately use the powers of government to make your life better. If they're not doing that, guess what? Hold their feet to the fire and let them know they'll be gone. They'll be gone. Next, they better enjoy it while it lasts, because next cycle they're out of there. So that's, I would, from a government politics standpoint, really, really hold your representatives accountable right now, because right now is their time to make good on those promises and all those campaign speeches that said, hey, we love the Latino community. Hey, we love the Black community. Hey, we love the Asian American community. And where is it? How are they demonstrating that right now? Right now is the time for them to demonstrate it. If they're not, hold their feet to the fire and let them know they'll be out if they don't get together.
Mm-hmm.
I love what Imani says, like, where is it? Where's the love? Well, yes, our legislators are definitely the place to start, but we don't stop there. We chase that love of money. These universities, those of us who have been able to exercise our right to an education. Of course, it sounds like a privilege to many when it's denied to others, but I know my law school and my undergrad sends me those emails looking for donations and endowments and support this and support that. And my response is always, what's going on with your EOF program? What's going on with your LEO program? LEO is a kind of an EOF program at the law school level. What are you doing for your undocumented students? What supports do you provide for students with DACA? So, make your money talk as well. Same, and that is true of even legislators when you hit them in the pocket. So yes, maybe certain legislators don't care what you think because they aren't counting on you to vote for them anyway. So they don't care what you think. But who are the big donors to that legislator, or who are the big donors to that university? Hit them, because they don't want bad press either. So we can get very creative of how to ensure that the needs of our community are met. And when it comes to universities, when I started talking about those unjust laws in 1996, a lot of public institutions have either use the excuse or genuinely misunderstand the law and says, oh, because of ERIRA, that's the name of the law, because of the illegal immigration and the laws passed in 1996, we can't provide funding. We can't do this. No, that's not true. They can't use their federal funding for it, but there's ways to use the state funding for it. There's ways to use your endowments. There's ways to use your other donations. So if you really are about us, get creative to ensure that your students have their needs met, and we just can't take no for an answer.
I love that, actually. I love the fact that it's not just making sure that the legislators and the politicians are accountable, but that you hit them where the money is. Because I will tell you, having run a campaign, being in the middle of running a campaign, campaigns take money, right? And those financial resources are important. And if you're not taking corporate PAC money or fossil fuel money, like, I am not, those donors are going to be important. And those are the folks that, unfortunately, a lot of the establishment politicians listen to the most. I also really like that, Carol, about going to your alma maters, because if you're in that privileged position to be able to be in part of that alumni network, to be able to be part of that, I think that's exactly, what we all can do, if we want to move this towards a place of greater equity. So there is a question, I think, on the chat. I'd love for you all to answer it, which is just a general one from C. Leak to all panelists: how you're reaching people without access to a computer. And this is particularly, important in general, especially now, right? Because we're doing this via Zoom. We are digital, we are virtual. I know for sure that we ourselves as a campaign have been doing texting and phone banking, but we can't go out and, personally canvas the way we normally would. But I know that there are it's very important to be out there. I'm curious, how you all are doing it. Zelly, you want to start answering that?
Sure. Even though a lot of our, I guess you would say, marketing is done through online, a lot of also has been through word of mouth. So a lot of times people reach out to us because they either have heard about the services that we are providing to the community, or they may have seen like a news clip on TV or like a shout out from the governor, and they want to like find out like who's doing this. So a lot of times people have been reaching out to us who don't necessarily have a computer. A lot of people that we do are providing support to. There are seniors, there are, sometimes disabled, sometimes they are legally blind. So a lot of people don't have access to computers or even use technology, but it's still important for us to be able to connect them with these specific resources. And the key thing that we're trying to do in our mutual aid network is not just provide them with just meals, hot meals, but also provide them with these resources. Because as mentioned before, a lot of them are not really watching TV. They're not really like on Facebook or the Twitter where they get this constant flow of new information. So a lot of them are not being updated on what's what, right? Because as you mentioned, like maybe earlier in the pandemic, people were saying that the 3 major symptoms for, COVID-19 was, short of breath, fever, and I think like a cough or something like that.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 major symptoms. So people thought that if they didn't have those 3 symptoms, then there was no need for them to go, to the hospital or even get checked out. When in actuality, as we started to go through this, pandemic, we realized there's way more symptoms than that. And there was even a higher chance that, a lot of people who tested positive for COVID-19 never even had a fever or didn't have some of these other issues. There was a lot of misconceptions about, because, your lovely president was saying that we didn't have to wear a mask, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, wear a mask. And then, it was too late because there was a shortage of masks. So it was being able to provide our seniors, who is also, the most vulnerable and most susceptible to catching this virus or being, having this viral be succumb to them, to provide them with the right information in order to keep themselves protected. And since they're not getting that information from the computer or the TV, we ourselves had to provide that information, whether through phone calls or by including little brief pamphlets in their packages as well.
That's great. And, being out in the community and doing this by not just word of mouth, but also just being able to talk to folks, I think it's really important, especially those who are homebound. Imani, is there anything you want to add or share?
Yeah, so I would say with regards to elections, I mean, the best way to reach out to people is to volunteer to phone bank. Folks are still volunteering to phone bank for different campaigns and everything. You can sign up, different sites, and I'm sure Dr. Krabak, you can, put your info in here, but you sign up, you get all the information, and then you just you can phone call from your house, and people are still using their phones, and especially some of the more sensitive groups that Zelly mentioned, such as the elderly, for sure, certainly still using their phone lines. So that's one way to still get in contact with folks. And then as far as the census is concerned, when this first happened, as far as the shutdown, a lot of organizations were still doing some outside stuff, just taking precautions, using their masks, gloves, etc., to still get the word out, knock on doors, and push the word about the census census. For a while, that was paused in the middle once things started really like ramping up and getting bad. But in a couple of weeks, I believe a lot of those organizations are going to be back out on the ground, still taking the same precautions, but knocking on doors and getting out the word there. So I mean, if any of I can look now and maybe send some of the information on like my socials or send it to you to send out to folks. If those organizations need volunteers, try volunteering for that. And that's another way to get out, because I know soon they're going to be coming outside again, taking those precautions and getting folks to sign up for the census and everything. So those are the kind of the two ways that we do it without computers. So it's phone banking and then just on the ground stuff, but taking precautions that normally wouldn't be taken, but obviously because we're in this pandemic, it's absolutely essential that we take them.
So I have a question, I have a follow-up question, Imani, about the census, and I think all of you can answer. So look, these are communities that are already probably going to underreport, right, from the beginning. And now we have a pandemic, and now we have very vulnerable community population. And it sounds like the underreporting is going to be even worse, particularly for the communities that need the most resources. So how important is it? What can we do, all of us, to advocate for this? And are we already seeing this kind of disparity in the census numbers that were coming back? And I'm imagining we are, because I know that where I live in Glen Rock, we're one of the highest in terms of reporting for census already, something like 84%, right? But I know that this is not the same across New Jersey. I know it's not across, the same across certain communities. And I'd love to hear more about, what else we can do, all of us.
Yeah, so I would say definitely, for one, fill out your census, right? If you have access to a computer and the internet and all of that, go online and fill out the census for yourself. Number one, first thing, do it. And it takes it's not that long, it takes like 5 minutes, maybe less. I mean, I did mine really, really quickly. So fill it out for yourself for sure. Once you fill it out, send out a message to everybody you know, people in your community, let your neighbors know if you have their number, post online, get the word out, post the link, let people know, hey, you have to sign up for this. It is essential that you do this. And, it's kind of hard telling folks that they have to fill out this thing online when, hey, maybe they don't have groceries today, or, I might lose my housing, right? Because we're all very much steeped in this stuff. So we, it hits us the importance of it immediately. But if folks aren't getting their immediate needs met, it's almost seems silly to them, like, I have to go fill this thing out online. I have a million other like heavily important necessities to take care of right now. But I think, talking to people and letting them know, hey, when aid comes down for this stuff, when all the dust settles and government funding finally comes through, or if our officials decide to get it together and have funding come through, we need to have these accurate numbers so that they can know that our communities are really the ones that deserve these funds and need these funds. So that's what I would say is, first, fill it out yourself. Definitely make the effort to go and fill out your census for yourself. And then send out text messages, make phone calls, post online to try and get others that in your community to do the same.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and your point, Imani, about the fact that folks are really just looking for how they're surviving a lot of time, and adding this, census information even in mutual aid packages or things like that, seems like it is tone deaf in some ways. But even thinking about linking it to the kinds of resources that are available, might be informative. Carol, I know that you said that you had kept going with the census work. I'd love to hear, how you kept going and what are the kinds of things that you shared.
At Wind of the Spirit, we always say nothing about us without us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they talk about the census, they talk about contact tracing, they talk about this, they talk about that, and really we have to push our way onto the table, into the table, pull out the chair for somebody else to get to that table, because they're not calling us when they're making those decisions. And when it came to the census, we got at that table and we made sure that we were in our community, we had the resources and the authority to to ensure we got the census count as high as possible in our communities. For example, in Dover, already Dover, which is where I live and one of the places where Wind of the Spirit is very active, Dover's census completion is higher than the state average. And I know that that is because of our work and the work of many others who have really tapped into this. Wind of the Spirit focuses on labor rights. So we are trained and train others in OSHA, which is the Health and Safety Organization of the federal government, in OSHA's workplace safety. And we're also trained in FEMA disaster site response. So we had this training and we were talking about COVID-19 since November. We were ready to go. So when we were reaching out to municipalities and letting them know, this is coming, what is your plan? What is your command system? A lot of elected officials were looking at us like, what are you talking about? And then of course the crisis hit and we were all caught off guard and not humble about it. Wasn't me, but our director and our staff, they were ready. So we had masks, we had goggles, we use painter suits. So we have painter suits that we wear and we, in the labor, if any of you work at factories or work in the labor movement, you know, donning and doffing. So donning, and actually nurses do this too. So donning is when you put on your protective equipment and doffing is when you take it off. So we were already practicing our donning and doffing and making sure that we use chalk and we create 6 feet of space. And that's how we go out to laundromats, to the corners and talk to day laborers. And with every mask, you get a little flyer that lets you know, one, complete the census. This is why it's so important, right? We don't have enough beds in our hospital to meet the need because in part of the census undercount, right? Our children's classrooms are overcrowded in Patterson and Dover because in part of the census undercount. There's other factors as well. And then if you don't have a computer, if you don't know how to read English or Spanish, we do have several members of our community that have had a 2nd grade education at most or a 9th grade education at most and have challenges with using the internet or reading at all. You can call Wind of the Spirit. You call us and over the phone, we'll walk you through and make sure that your census is completed. So we really make sure that you get the information again with that mutual support. So I'm giving you a mask, you give back to the community your census. You know, I might be providing this food, you give back to the community your voter registration form and make sure you get out to vote because we all contribute. And that's how we've been doing at Wind of the Spirit. And thankfully, none of us have contracted COVID-19, despite the fact that 3 of my neighbors, God rest in peace and rest in power, have passed away from COVID-19, despite the fact that, as I mentioned, Dover has a really high rate of COVID-19 illness and death. Our census is, our rate is 62%, and I believe the national average is 51% or 59%.
That's amazing. You're one of the first organizations that I've spoken to that talked about how prepared you were ahead of time. And this actually makes it even worse when we realized we had a federal government who had similar, actually better information in some ways than Wind of the Spirit or other organizations did not act on it, right? Not only did not act on it, just continues to deny the facts that are out there, that continues to deny what actually the reality is, what science is telling us to do, what science has been telling us to do for a long time. So this is both commendable, and I am so filled with joy at the kinds of things that you are doing, Carol, and completely impressed, while at the same time really even more frustrated at the kinds of things that we hadn't been doing at the federal level for this, and preparing in the way that we could have been and should have been doing this, because this utter disaster was preventable. I mean, the virus clearly was not, but the kinds of response that we have was completely preventable. And I'm hoping that, Zelly, you were talking in the beginning about how we're hoping that these mutual aid resource networks that we're doing right now, that we're trying to all be part of it. I'm hoping, I agree completely with you that I'm hoping they continue, because these kinds of things that Wind of the Spirit is doing, that Iman is doing with Census, all of that comes together so that we're all better prepared. as we keep going, because I will tell you this pandemic might be this pandemic, but with climate change and with a lot of things that are happening, public health crises are coming. They're just going to be here. This is going to be a pattern that we have. So we better be better prepared than we are now. So kudos for sure. Thank you, Carol. We have a question next. Actually, this might be on here. Okay, great. So there are actually two questions related to the same thing. So we've heard a lot, right? So again, we talk about inequities, we talk about police brutality, we talk about the kind of inequities that happen, that continue to happen. And so there are two questions related to it, which is, what's the plan for getting police departments to be more reflective of the communities they serve? The recent killings of unarmed people of color is outrageous, from FW Bishop. And Madeline is asking, there are still racially motivated crimes being committed by the police during quarantine. What can be done to protest and advocate for justice at home? Clearly, this is not a new phenomenon. Clearly seeing things like police arresting folks for not wearing masks in one area while, high-fiving them in another is something that we've all seen. And it's just, a tip of the iceberg, right, for the kinds of things they have. For moving forward with justice in this particular way. Do you all have thoughts that we can think about in terms of advocacy, in terms of what we do, and how we come together?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. Yeah, I think like as many of us who've been witnessing a lot of this brutality that's been showcased on our news or cell phone videos, a lot of us are being even more traumatized by these visuals than the trauma that we are already experiencing because of COVID-19, right? That no matter if you are going outside or even if you are self-isolating inside, you are prone to become a victim of police violence, as we've seen with Breonna Taylor in Louisville, where police officers did a no door knock entry into her home and started firing, and they had the wrong address and ended up killing this young Black woman. So as we've seen, we can't sleep in our own beds. We can't, walk in the park. We can't even do our jobs delivering in a white neighborhood without having a fear that someone is going to accuse us of wrongdoing or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we're in this really difficult situation of we're having to pivot our strategies and how we approach challenging any type of police brutality or violence. Normally we will all, try to do a rally or some type of direct action, which will obviously involve, close contact with one another. And we have to, pivot not only to protect ourselves from the virus, but protect ourselves from police violence, who may say like, oh, because we are not social distancing during this rally, they're going to now, arrest us or assault us. So we've seen some creative things going where people are doing, car rallies, or people are really cognizant of being socially distancing themselves at rallies. We've seen a lot more phone banking. We've seen a lot more email blasts and using these digital mediums in order to create awareness about the injustice, but also use our power with the social media in order to attack some of these structures and to ensure some type of accountability. But we have to really interrogate what accountability is, what accountability could look like, especially in these moments, that when we talk about some of these incidents that's happened, a lot of these incidents didn't happen like yesterday or 2 weeks ago. Some of these incidents that we just now found out about happened like a month ago or 2 months ago. And it's only because of, activists on the ground and social media that we all have become, raised awareness or heightened to what has happened. So I would definitely encourage everyone to really tap in, use our power of social media, because for so long we have been disempowered because we did not have access to any media. We did not have access to newspapers or any type of things to get our voice out. But now, because of social media and our prevalence on it, we have this ability now to share our stories, to amplify each other's stories. And I really encourage all of us to continue doing that, because there's power in that. and then that creativity that exists in that platform.
No, I appreciate that. Imani or Carol, do you want to add?
Yeah, so I would add two things. One, that's more of a general statement of what needs to happen with policing, and then one that's more specific to now. So in general, I find that especially when it comes to politicians and governmental representatives, when you present to them issues of, they're doing a town hall and you present to them issues of police violence, they kind of fall back on, well, police are stressed out. They have a hard job, et cetera, et cetera. And like, here's the thing. I'm an attorney. I work in government politics. I have a hard job. I'm really stressed, but I don't go around punching people in the face. And I couldn't, right? I couldn't. If I were to punch someone in the face, guess what? There would be legal consequences. I don't go around beating people or shooting people because I'm stressed out. And if I did, I would face, punishment for that. And I think generally what the police forces need as a first step, right? Like there's obviously the penultimate, which is getting rid of police in general, but as a first step is really holding them accountable for things that they do that are way out of line, that are professionally irresponsible. And that should look like, kicking them off the force. Once you kick them off the force, making sure they can't go and join another force. Those types of things that really speak to, the profession, like the professional level of law enforcement. Those need to be enforced, and people need to be held accountable for their bad behavior, just like any other profession out there, any other profession. So that's the general answer. As far as specific to this issue, I want to take a second to talk to those who consider themselves white allies. If you know that you live in a neighborhood that, you go to the park and you set out your, picnic stuff during COVID, and the police just kind of like beep their horn in solidarity with you and they wave to you and whatever, and nothing actually happens to you, guess what? Hey, how about you take the initiative to step up, call your representatives, call those police departments and talk about, hey, in my neighborhood, this isn't happening. Right? And we're doing just fine. We're social distancing. Why in that neighborhood, one town over or two towns over, are police treating people like they're not humans, like they're not citizens, like they're not people, like they don't belong here. It's time, I think, for allies to really make that commitment, because what you see is communities of color always fighting for themselves. Always fighting for themselves. And at the same time they're fighting, also trying to survive whatever it is that they're going through. Allies, instead of just making these grand statements, really, really, really put your privilege to work and say, hey, my neighborhood doesn't have this right now. Why is this happening in this neighborhood? And people will listen to you, because again, that's the privilege. So I would like to challenge white allies in this moment to really step up and speak out against this, like the differences in policing in communities. So those would be my two answers.
I would add, so thank you for that, both Zelly and Imani. I would add to that just this, your challenge is one that we should all be taking, no matter who we are. And I will say that particularly with COVID-19 and coronavirus, right, we're seeing spikes in incidences against multiple groups of people, in addition to the baseline level of brutality that Black folks have always felt. So we're seeing these spikes in Asian American populations, we're seeing anti-Semitism rise up, all of that. And I'm actually doing this call out for folks who are South Asian and Asian. And I will say that we need to look ourselves into our communities and our groups and talk about anti-Blackness that exists there. And we need to talk about how we can be allies and what that means. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that we are other. What it means is the opposite of othering people, right? Because if we're true allies, then we're taking on those struggles as ourselves. And what we're doing is fighting as one, because it's not about centering us. Because again, when we look at privilege and when we look at the constellation of how that happens, I will say particularly with South Asian populations, we are up ahead on that privilege ladder. Whereas, even within the communities. So I would challenge folks that are in my community to step up more than maybe we have in the past. So I would add that to Imani's challenge here. So,
And Dr. Arti, I would just give us some concrete steps. So I think the question was talking about diversifying the police force, and I just want to highlight that while that is something we all should, we're a diverse state, we should be working in diverse workplaces. Diversifying the police department alone is not enough. Unfortunately, we have internalized racism, and we sometimes can police each other in negative, aggressive ways, just as somebody else from another race could. So I would encourage us to, one, go to newarkpolicereform.org and educate yourself and others about the Newark Communities for Accountable Policing. The Newark Communities for Accountable Policing are doing amazing work in ensuring that there is civilian review of police complaints. Two, know your rights. Again, that resource document includes the Know Your Rights document during a stay-at-home order or a shutdown or a curfew. So going back to what Imani had mentioned, right, in your neighborhood, you might be able to hang out at the park, but in this other neighborhood, we have no access to parks, and that's exactly what's happening in Dover with surrounding communities. So why is it that a suburban mom with her girlfriends and her dog and her stroller and the kids can have that COVID-19 picnic as long as they're 6 feet apart and, you know, less than 10, but we can't even sit on our stoops in the city, or we can't even look for work on the corners if we are day laborers because now the police are called, right? So certainly really know your rights, know what a stay-at-home order is, know what a curfew is, know when a police officer can arrest you, because best believe you can be arrested. We are under a state of emergency, and that expands police powers. So educate yourself and educate others. And then the third thing I would add is, you know, support Newark Communities for Accountable Policing, know your rights, and really just take that step to dive deep. You know, and Dr. Arti was calling in the Asian community. I, of course, call in the Latina community, Latinx community, and so we're all clear. Plenty of us are white in the Latinx community, and plenty of us are Black in the Latinx community, and plenty of us are 1,000,001, you know, shades in between, and there is racism within our community as well. And even within Black communities, you can have racism coming from Caribbean communities against African American, as in descendants of enslaved Africans here in the US, and a difference between African cultures. I'm not Black, I'm Nigerian, right? So we really need to educate ourselves on race in the US, because it is a social construct, and we don't understand it the same way in Colombia or in Nigeria or in Jamaica. So it makes for very, or in India or any other country in the world, it makes for difficult conversations. We need to have those conversations. We need to have those conversations, and I appreciate you giving us this platform to name it and really discuss it openly.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, Carol, because it is an artificial construct. When we bring our stories with us, we bring our prejudices with us wherever we go. I think none of us is free of that, but I think that we also bring our privilege and upholding systems of racism with us. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, from whoever we are, to figure out how we do that, and to figure out how we have those conversations. I will say that for my part, it's been a journey. It continues to be a journey, right? Because we all have that mythology of this American dream. At least in this country we do, because we ignore Native and Indigenous folks. We ignore how folks were brought here, slaves, and how they were stolen and kidnapped and brought here. And we have this mythology of this, pulling yourselves up from the bootstraps. And coming here. Definitely our family has benefited for that. I've benefited from that mythology because I've benefited from the opportunities that were given to me. It's also been a journey understanding that not everyone has those opportunities because of the systems and hundreds of years of systemic racism that's here, and that it's the responsibility of all of us to fight for that greater equity. to fight to make sure, to understand where our roles are in the system, and to fight to make sure that we don't uphold these. Because at the end of the day, what happens is what's happening right now, which is greater inequity, greater income inequality. And when we have things like this that are happening, that are just widening the gaps and making it impossible for any of us to live. So I really, really appreciate this conversation. I would love to give you all the floor as we end this, because frankly, I could sit here and talk and listen to you for a long time. But given what we're doing, given the important work that you all are doing, I don't want to take up more of your time at all. But I'd love to have to know from you actionable steps. Are there, either with the census or vote by mail or Zelly, and definitely we're putting all of the resources that you all talked about on our website as well at the end on our mutual resources page and slides, so they'll be available to everyone. But if you have one or two things in closing that you'd like to share, I'd love to give you the floor. So jump in with whatever order you want to.
I'll just add that of the several calls to action, also support our most vulnerable community members in prisons and in immigrant detention centers. There is an executive order that the Office of the Public Defender fought for to release people from New Jersey prisons. Our loved ones are dying in prisons at god-awful rates, and they do not have to. They do not have to. I believe that there is a hearing before the Supreme Court on this issue. But please, and again, that call to our own communities. I've had pushback from my own community, like, well, if somebody's a rapist or a murderer, we don't want to let them out. We need to have these conversations, right? How many people we talk about, that's another long conversation, right? But rape is defined as penetration. And there's consent issues. There's so much restorative justice principles that are not respected within our criminal justice system. And a human being is a human being, not a rapist. A human being is a human being, not a murderer. A human being is a human being, not an illegal immigrant, right? So whether the person was convicted of or accused of selling loose cigarettes on the corner, rest in peace, rest in power, Eric Garner, or of something more grave, a death sentence is not, we don't have the death sentence that is applied here in New Jersey. And allowing people to rot in COVID-19 infested jails and prisons in our state is a death sentence. So I would just add that call to action, that remember our incarcerated loved ones, both at the federal immigration ICE detention level and at the local criminal level.
I'm very much.
Yeah, I'll jump in next. So as mentioned before, I co-found an organization called North Jersey Mutual Aid, and we're providing like a range of support to particularly our seniors. To start off with providing 25 hot meals to our seniors in Patterson, and now we're doing like 200 per day, which is like scaled up like amazingly, and that was only because of support from the local community, online community, people volunteering, and people, giving us generous donations. The next thing that we're going to try to do is, like you mentioned earlier, is do a lot of wellness check phone calls and also prescription pickups. I remember one time when I went to drop off food to someone, they offhandedly mentioned how they had a prescription at this local CVS there for like a week. And because they couldn't get out the house, that it was just sitting there. And I was like, you know what, just stop right there. I'll go and grab it. So I went to the CVS, I grabbed it and I paid for it and I gave it to her. And she was just so happy about that. And that is something that we want to extend, further, because there's so many seniors that are stuck inside the house because of this mandate. And we want them to be inside their homes to be safe. So in order for them to be safe and sustain themselves through this pandemic, we need to provide them as much resources and support as possible. So I'm asking anyone who's on this Zoom call or watching who wants to be involved, whether it is do wellness checks, whether it's doing meal drop-offs or prescription pickups, to please reach out to myself on Twitter or on Instagram or Facebook, or our Facebook group is North Jersey Mutual Aid Resources, and please just tap into it. Mutual aid, as you mentioned before, isn't about being part of a big, organization. It could just be simply you looking out for your neighbor. When you're going outside doing your grocery shopping, you can call your neighbor and say, hey, I'm outside. They actually got some Lysol here. Do you want me to pick up some for you? And just grab that, and just having that mutual connection with your neighbor and rebuilding what it means to be in community is going to be very important in these times.
I think it's great. Thank you, Zelly. Imani?
Yeah, so, a common thread between all of this and everything that we've seen so far with COVID is that it's very clear that we need a radical shift in government right now. We need a radical shift in who represents us. We need a radical shift in the way that they represent us. And so one way we can start that is to start running campaigns for candidates that, like our hosts, who are trying to change these types of things. So I'm going to drop the link for Movement School. We teach everyone how to run progressive campaigns with the same values that everyone on this call holds. So we want to radically shift in this country, issues around climate change. We want to radically shift issues around healthcare. We want to radically shift issues around infrastructure. And the only way we're going to do that is if we get representatives into office that are willing to do that, want to do that, and are willing to fight for the people. So I've dropped that link in the chat. Please sign up. It's free. You can go there right now. You have until the 25th and beyond to sign up. So please do that. And also go to our wonderful host's website and donate or sign up to Phone Bank, because we need folks like her in office to really fight for us in issues like this, so that we as the people can get everything that we need and the necessities that are just of dire importance right now. So thank you so much for having us, and everyone out there, please, 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 go to the links and sign up.
I appreciate that, Imani, and I appreciate all of you. Really, from the bottom of my heart, I'm so grateful for you to come on and start to have this conversation. This conversation is not finished. It continues. It needs to happen every single day. It needs to happen in multiple different ways that we need to. But I appreciate that we have at least started this right now. I think we have a mutual aid. I know we have a mutual aid resources page. All of the links that you've shared will be on there. I think the slide will be coming up in a minute on the arthyforcongress.com/mutual aid resources program. Please support Wind of the Spirit. Please support Azali in his mutual aid efforts. Please support Imani and check out Movement School. Absolutely. I think that I started off talking about how this pandemic has revealed and deepened the fissures that we have, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? We don't have to continue in this way. As Imani mentioned, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to change the system, to rebuild it, to make it more equitable for all of us, and to try really hard to make sure that we can shift and have a seismic shift, the kind of shift that we've already had, the kind of shock that we've already had. We can use that as an opportunity to really change the system, to make sure it is working for all of us. And I think that at the end of the day, I think that's what we all need to try and do. And the only way we're going to do that is when we build a safety net that is a social safety net that is stronger than the one we have, so that we don't just rely on the safety net like Zelly was talking about earlier today, because people are falling through the cracks. And the only way we're going to do that is when we have folks who advocate and implement policies that are going to make us more resilient and more sustainable in the future. So I really appreciate you being on. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, and we could, and we will probably talk about this forever. So I appreciate it very much. We're going to stop the live in a minute, but if you don't mind staying on for a second, that would be great. So thank you again. Oh.